I was becoming the bottleneck of the business. Energy is your number one currency. We were trying to market to everyone, but then we realized that we were marketing to no one. I was in EO literally for a week and a half. It used to be external factors. I want to be that person for some of these people that I wish I had at that stage.
Today's guest, Marco Monteiro, the founder of MJ Health Group, the parent company behind Listen to Your Body and MD Exercise Physiology. Since starting the business in November 2021, Marco has grown it into 4 successful allied health-led personal training studios specializing in exercise for women navigating menopause, primarily those around 50 years old. With 40 staff and $3 million in revenue in a highly competitive market, Marco's journey is a powerful example of resilience, focus, and building impact through health. Please welcome Marco Monteiro.
This episode is sponsored by Outsourcing Angel. Most founders don't need another hire. They need to stop being the bottleneck. Outsourcing Angel helps you uncover what's actually keeping you stuck. Build a freedom plan with clear success metrics. Then place skilled remote talent who take ownership of decision-making, not just the easy tasks. Because the goal isn't a business that keeps you busy. It's to build one that gives you freedom. Take the free Bottleneck Identifier quiz at outsourcingangel.com.
Welcome to the show, Marco. So great to have you here.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm excited to talk about health. As we get older, it's kind of the topic of the town, and, we start to care about it a lot more. So it's really great to have you on here. But before we talk about, some questions around our health and menopause and things that will be very relevant to me, I want to start off with your journey in entrepreneurship. I guess take us back to when you were growing up. Did you always know that you were going to be an entrepreneur?
Yeah, well, I've never actually had a job interview. So if that gives you an indication of where my path was going to go. My first job was working in a fast food industry job when I was 14. So very different to the health. It started one way, ended up another way. And I got that job because my next door neighbor happened to be the manager. So I avoided job interviews there. I then got into the health and fitness industry just by chance, fell into it, as you do. And I didn't realize at the time when I was working for myself out of a gym that I was already a business owner. I didn't see it that way. But I remember getting into that, and there was a lot of naysayers. There was a bit of negativity around, PT in 2011. Who's going to pay you $50 to train them? However, 3 months in, I was already making, good money. I had my books full. And then 8-9 years post that, I was ready for my another challenge. I had put 1 or 2 people underneath me whilst I was a PT out of the gym, but I still felt like I was coasting and I was ready for the next stage of entrepreneurship. And then 4.5 years ago, I started MJ Health Group with Listen to Your Body and MD Exercise Physiology under that brand and the umbrella. And that's when my entrepreneurship journey really kicked off.
So what is it about health and fitness that really drawn you to it? And it's the industry that you're passionate about and really going all in as a business?
Yeah, great question. So I've got a very deep-seated passion for health and fitness, and it does show, and it is one of the main contributors to my success, I feel. I had a pretty turbulent childhood and upbringing, and health and fitness was the constant throughout my life when things around me were a little bit chaotic and not so sure. It kept me on the straight and narrow, lack of a better term. And I believe it did save and improve my life so vastly that this passion I now have to share that with others is I've been told, contagious. So that's where it stems from. And then it has morphed into seeing certain populations suffer and not really get the care and support that they deserve. A little bit more of a fix-it approach rather than a preventative. So it's morphed from more of a personal journey and how it helped me to now trying to instill that in others, even if it's not necessarily for the same reasons or places that it stems from me.
Do you mind sharing a little bit about the things that you had to overcome, as a young boy, and how did that shape you into the leader that you are today?
Yeah, so I grew up in the western suburbs of Melbourne, in the burbs, as some would say. Commission housing, all of that. I didn't really have parental figures when I was growing up, so I was really left to my own devices. I remember vividly all my friends when I was sort of 11, 12, 13 being actually quite jealous of the fact that I had no sort of parental figure telling me what I had to do, what time to be home. And I thought it was the greatest thing ever at that age. until I came to being, an adult and getting a bit more responsibility, that I realized what I had lacked, and that mentorship and that figure. So I guess my journey of entrepreneur was always kind of doing things solo. That worked out for a time, but then I also started to present that I didn't actually know how to delegate and lean on people and actually be vulnerable and put myself out there. A lot of what I experienced when I was growing up reinforced my belief that hold everything in, don't trust. But when you start to delegate, when you start to scale, goes the other way, where you're having to rely on people and trust. So that was a big learning and personal development case for me to develop that. Otherwise, I'd probably still be a sole trader if I was still operating from my previous belief system.
That is so interesting. You were talking about you had so much freedom that it didn't serve you well, and on the other end, I had no freedom, so I fought for my freedom. But it's really interesting, as you grow older, you actually do appreciate some sort of structure, right? And I think when it comes to fitness and health, that you really do need structure and discipline. What's your take on all that?
Yeah, so I speak about this very often. So the words discipline, motivation, they get thrown around a lot. So with our clientele, we get mostly people that aren't, gym goers per se. They've never probably been to a gym. They're very intimidated with gym, and they will use language like, I've been trying the last couple of weeks, but my motivation just isn't there. I'm a firm believer that it's not for chasing motivation and discipline. Even myself, who now lives and breathes fitness, and I couldn't imagine a world without it because I've been doing it since I was pretty much, a teen. It's not the motivation that's going to carry you there, because motivation will wane. You're going to have sickness in the family. You're going to have harder times at work. You're going to have even a death in the family. So if you stop every time the motivation wanes, you're probably going to go for 2 months at best. It's actually ritual and a lifestyle that allows to get you there outside of everything else. So I've always said, if you want to live a fit and healthy lifestyle, you need to live like a fit and healthy person. Sounds kind of obvious, but it's the things you do. It's the things, just as importantly, that you don't do, right? You don't have 3.5 bottles of wine on Friday night. You wake up on Saturday instead and go to the gym. So it's not motivation. It's more the lifestyle.
Yes. At the beginning, it does feel like such a chore to get into fitness, but it's after repetition, it becomes a lifestyle. So that's right. I understand what it's like.
It's similar to entrepreneurship. That's also a lifestyle.
That's right.
You have to live the life of that entrepreneur lifestyle to become successful at entrepreneurship. You can't just rely on motivation, because you're going to have hard weeks. You're not going to hit KPIs some weeks. You're going to have people you relied on that let you down. If you're going to give up at every turn that something goes wrong and the motivation wanes, I don't know about you, Lynn, but I feel like giving up in my business every second week, right? So, it's the lifestyle that you, and the minds and the thought patterns and the behaviors that you got to encapsulate, not just rely on motivation when you feel good.
That's a really, really great analogy. And so then you started off as a PT and group trainings, things like that. How did you then pivot into, I guess, the category of menopause and allied health? Take me through how you transitioned your business into that niche.
Yeah, so there's a couple of pivots here. So I initially started training athletes. I was doing amateur bodybuilding at the time. I tried my hand in powerlifting as well. So I was going pretty hard. And once again, at that time when there wasn't much structure and a bit of chaos in my life, that was bringing in a lot of structure and control. So it was making me be able to control the things I couldn't when everything around me was going crazy. So that was that initial beginnings. But then I realized pretty early that I didn't want to train athletes. It came with things that I didn't necessarily want to gravitate towards. So I started training women, mums, dads, 40s, 50s, and that just almost fell by chance. I then started trying to leverage how I could make more in my business by, instead of training one person at a time, grouping 3 or 4 women together that I knew would get on and charging them slightly less, but the hourly rate would still be more, and training them at the same time in the gym that I was working at. So starting to run these little semi-professional groups. When I reflected, I realized, wow, a lot of who I'm seeing are that women in that group. So when it came to opening my own space, I wanted it to ensure that it aligned and the branding and the type was that already. Furthering on, then when I was 2.5 years into my next form of entrepreneurship, which was actually building my own space, when I reflected again, I said, wow, a lot of our customers, I'd say 80, 90%, were women in their 40s and 50s. And we were starting to try to figure out strategies on how to better speak to these people. Not even our current members, but prospects, meta ad spend was starting to go up. You've got AI, you've got more competition, you've got all sorts of things that bombard people now. It's like, how are we going to continue the attention that we were once getting 4 years ago when it was a little bit easier? And it was actually my wife, I must say, that came up with the idea when we were going for a walk. And I said, what are all these women dealing with? What's a pain point? She was like, hey, hello, menopause. That's when we started doubling down on our brand positioning, educating our team even further on that. And it's really changed our business over the last couple of years since we've done that. And it's great to see more and more data coming out about it. It is a little bit more, less taboo, common household knowledge now, but we do notice there's still a pretty large gap. And we're pretty proud that we're sort of early adopters in that space and really driving that.
When you were niching, were you worried about, oh, but how about other people who want me as well? Like,
So much
how did you overcome FOMO of like, I don't want to miss out on all the other target market?
Yeah, so I still do, to be completely honest. I still have that fear, and it's something that, once again, challenges of entrepreneurship that you continue to move through. But I found out pretty early on that we were trying to market to everyone, but then we realized that we were marketing to no one, right? You want people to see the brand, see the ads, whatever it may be, whatever touch point it may be, and go, that's me, that's me. And you can do that by becoming far more specific. So whenever I have that thought and go, oh, but what about the other people we might not get in? I just try to put that hat on and go, well, we tried that and it wasn't really working the same as when we went specific and said, are you dealing with joint pain? Are you dealing with brain fog? Are you dealing with this? Well, we're the people for you. And we even noticed in our sales calls now, we used to have to prime and educate for the first 20 minutes before we could even engage in our offer and what we do. Now, when they come in through that messaging, they literally go, oh, like, it's like that we already understand them. Oh, finally a place that gets me. The brain fog's horrible. Yeah, we get it. We see heaps of women like you. We can definitely help. So, yeah, it's an ongoing battle. However, it's one that I'm trying to lean into even more specialist and more heavier on the brand position, not taking the foot off the gas just because of fear.
Yeah, yeah. It makes so much sense because when people feel like you know them, then they feel like you are the solution for them. So I know you have a few studios. I guess what are some of the challenges in expanding yourself and what is on the horizon for you?
Yeah, great. So I'd say the biggest challenge for me personally was, as I touched on earlier, being able to lean into team members and delegate. I found early on, I was still in the thought pattern, even though I was already starting to scale, that I would just take on everything. I would assume responsibility for everything. I was doing two things by doing that. I was becoming the bottleneck of the business because we could only really expand with how much more I could continue to take on. And, without sounding arrogant, I've got a large capacity, I can take on a fair bit, but you've only got 24 hours in a day. But I was also not allowing myself to empower the people I was bringing in because they weren't able to make mistakes or be able to shine because I would sort of just come in and do it for them. So after about 2.5, 3 years, we had 4 locations that I was managing, about 38 staff. And I started to feel like I was just spinning plates. Like problems were coming in. It's like the classic entrepreneur story, problems are coming in faster than you can solve anymore, and reflecting and going, what's going on here? It was actually EO that helped me realize where I had gone wrong. So then I spent the better part of 1.5 years changing our culture and starting to empower the people. But what happened then was that there was a mix. There were some people that were waiting for that, like, this is great, and took this huge step forward, and we ended up elevating and becoming more senior in our roles. And then there was the other people that this isn't fair and push back. And to their credit, they were right because things had changed. So we had to make some really hard decisions there. So that was the personal side. In terms of what's on the horizon, look, we're doubling down even further on the menopause space. We believe that there's still a big gap between the support and the education a lot of women are receiving and what we think it should be. There's still a big gap, and we hear it in the language and what they're told all the time, every day. And we are looking at some other services like physio and clinical Pilates, adding on to our exercise physiology and strength group training that also specialize from the menopause space as well. So yeah, a couple of exciting things in going.
Exciting. Well, I used to live in Melbourne, so tell me what are some of the locations you're based in?
Yeah, so we've got Brunswick, we've got Ascot Vale, we've got Williamstown, and then there's one over in Martin in Adelaide as well in South Australia.
Yes. So what was it like to expand in interstate? Like, did you have to go over there, stay over there for a while to get it started?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah, it was a bit of a different journey. I didn't have to do that because I ended up linking up with my integrator of the business, my co-owner. So we actually met through the network, and then we went to an EOS, an Entrepreneur Operating Systems event. And I remember vividly because we were both already in the network and in the business, and we operated from very different spaces. We led very differently. James is phenomenal at the detail, the numbers. He's an accountant by trade, still very passionate about health and fitness as well. That was very much the vision, lacked a bit of detail, a bit of chaos, but loved risk and would scale. And we're sitting there being told about the relationship between a visionary and integrator, and both feeling that there's probably a little bit of gaps from our leadership. We both we're laughing, looking at each other going, geez, wow, you're really this and I'm really that. So from that, we actually decided to link up, and we now are in business together. So he assumed some of the things that were going over in Victoria, and I assumed the space he had in Martin. So we now co-own and co-lead, and I must say it's been an absolute blessing because it wasn't really a 2x linking up, it's probably a 5x because he's able to live in the space that he really performs in and elevate that space of the business, where I've been able to really elevate the space that he doesn't want to and where I want to lean in. So it's been great. And I always say, I'll be completely honest, Lynn, if I never had to check an email again, I'd be very happy. So I know where my strengths are.
yeah, congrats on finding the right partner in crime to help you with your business, because it could go either way, right? Partnership could be challenging, but when it's right, you feel like, yeah, the work is off your shoulders. Let's talk about menopause a little bit. So you see and hear more and more. For those that don't really know yet, I mean, I would say my knowledge is that small just because I feel like, I still feel so young. I'm in my 40s, but like I'm in denial of my age. Maybe I don't notice any symptoms yet, but what is it and what makes people go, hey, I need to exercise, I need to get into health so that I could take care of my body at this age?
Yeah, for sure. I'll give a little disclaimer that I'm not an exercise physiologist or physio by trade. So I'm speaking through my practitioners and what I've came to understand from them. So I do feel like a bit of an expert, even though I don't have the credentials. But what occurs is a big change in hormones, which in turn, if not addressed, it's almost, the data is showing, it's sometimes not even a case of if, it's when, due to the changes in that lifestyle, if things aren't looked at, and that's bone density issues, which will bring on osteopenia and then osteoporosis, all these things that we hear about that we don't particularly want. So the strength training is the absolute one modality that must happen. Now, there was a thinking back in 2011 when I entered the industry that was very strong and very hard to overcome. And we're going back a fair bit of time now, though. Sometimes I can't believe when I say it out loud how long I've been in the industry, but that, women shouldn't do weights. I used to hear it all the time from clients, like, no, I'll stick to the cardio section. And I used to spend a good 3-4 months early back then trying to educate them and getting into the weight room. That has shifted a lot. I've seen the difference with my time in the health and fitness, that you don't have to do that anymore. There's enough touch points doctors will suggest. But I think the gap is the need of the type of strength training. So, might ruffle a few feathers, but it's not mat work. It's not yoga. It's not Pilates. It is strength training, barbell, dumbbells. That's not to say you shouldn't do the other movements. They're great forms of movement and exercise, but the fundamental and number one modality that needs to be prescribed is weights, and that's where the gap is. So there is still an education piece that comes in. That's like, look, you might have a preconceived idea to why you shouldn't do heavy strength movements, and you don't have the energy at the moment, but you need to do it. And then it does become a cycle that energy will actually improve. Hormones will regulate a bit from doing that work. Your sleep will improve, which will all aid to that. So it becomes a bit of a vortex when you're doing the right thing, but when you're doing nothing, it becomes a vortex as well, because it makes you feel you don't have the energy. And who wants to lift heavy weights when you're flat, have brain fog, and don't feel the energy? So we get the symptoms, and we have a lot of compassion and empathy for that as well. But I think that's where, having someone who's educated in that space and has that tertiary education on the level at which it's done at, and then slow increments, rather than just join our class where it's gear 6, hard from the get-go, that can actually be detrimental and make you feel worse.
Really interesting. Now I think why I don't really feel any symptoms yet is because fitness is part of my life. Like,
yes,
weight training or just having movement all the time is just part of life. And I guess it's preventative. It's me not feeling any issues with health, knock on wood at the moment. There's also for men. Men also go through their own type of menopause. I forgot the name for it. Do you want to highlight a little bit about what men go through?
Yeah, men go through, it's a similar presentation. It's just different. It's not concentrated, sort of highly one stage of life. But, men and women will lose muscle mass after the age of 20, and there will be a drop in hormones. And there has been studies. Now, of course, you can cherry pick studies that, men who are strength training at the age of 40 have been able to keep the same testosterone as men who don't train at 20. So it is preventative and anti-aging to a degree. Once again, there can be conflict in studies, but there are studies that show that. So even for men, being 37, 38, 39, 40, if you've been doing it for a set amount of time, it doesn't have to be an age where you start using language like I'm too old or my back hurts because I'm old, which we also hear from that population. It can be very much avoided and pretty much slowing down time, like a time warp, if you continue to do it. We have found in our business that for both genders, the problems usually occur and we get feedback on high symptom presentation when they haven't done anything at all. That's usually when we hear got really bad brain fog, I got this. We don't usually have people coming going, I strength train 4 times a week for 20 years and I'm getting X, Y, Z. So yeah, there's something in that.
Yeah, I love that. And what would you say the benefit is for as an entrepreneur? How does that positively impact us as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, as in being fit and healthy?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So I've been doing a fair bit of work lately just around leadership and some neuro-linguistic programming, and a lot of what, I've been told is, energy is your number one currency. I've seen that myself when you're not able to give your best or do your best, or your energy is letting you down, or, I couldn't imagine some of the brain fog that we hear and that presents with some of the people that come to see us trying to run a business and scale a business presenting like that. It's hard enough as it is, Lynn, to be completely honest. Right? So energy is your number one currency. So I believe that comes from a couple of places, obviously trying to live in the space that you do your best work in. So like I said before, I feel energy drained when I live in detail and do spreadsheets. So I've delegated to someone that gives them energy. I can get energy from the space that I live in, which is relationships and big ideas and culture. But then on top of that, the energy really comes from the things that you're willing to do beforehand and not do. So I've got a pretty strict sleep schedule. I'm in bed by 9 o'clock. I'm up at the similar time. I don't drink. I'm, asleep at the same time on the weekends. So there's consistency. I exercise 3-4 times a week in terms of weights. I run 3-4 times a week. So it gets to 7-8 p.m. And if I need to keep on working, it's not really an issue for me. But then I've, heard of other circumstances of even friends who are the same age as me, and they're done at 3:30. They've got 3:30itis. Energy is your number one currency, and I can't imagine trying to move through things that in turn are going to be tough, entrepreneurship and life in general, running out of juice halfway through the day.
Yeah, totally. We need to feed this engine that makes everything. It's our family, it's our business. So, yeah, great answer on that. Let's talk a little bit about EO. You already highlight a little bit about how it got you to think very differently about your leadership. What made you decide to join EO in the first place?
So interesting. We had a member at one of my studio locations who was a member of EO. So she ended up asking me to get a coffee just to speak about business, because they were in business as well. And I, at the time, was starting to yearn for a mentor, was feeling quite lonely, couldn't share things with employees, and was holding a lot in, and just felt like a lot of my friends weren't in business. So I didn't really have sounding boards or anywhere to go to. So I was actually sharing that after we'd spoken about a bit about our businesses and our challenges within our respective industries, and just listening intently, and said, I think you'd get a lot of value out of this group that I'm in. I was like, okay. She shared, and I didn't really get a sense of sort of what it was about, but I was yearning for it so much that I just put my hand up and went for it. And then, ended up joining, and that was my exposure and how I got in.
And what have been some of the benefits? I know you've highlighted the delegation issue that it exposed. Were there any other things that you remember about being in EO?
Yeah, for sure. There's probably a couple of big moments. I'll touch on that one a little bit more. I was in EO literally for a week and a half, and I was just having people challenges, culture issues, scaling challenges. And I was starting to realize I knew it internally, but I needed someone to sort of bring it to forefront and fruition, that I was having culture challenges in the sense that we had very strong core values and we had that all down pat. But it really was just words on paper, Lynn, and it wasn't actually managed against, and there wasn't a standard held against it, because I was too worried about being liked rather than having to have the hard conversations and push back when I needed to. So I knew deep down, but I put in the chat really early. Like I was probably in literally for a week. I'm having some scaling issues. Does anyone have 10 to discuss? I remember I got a few calls from WhatsApp. I was actually walking around JB looking for a couple of studios for one of the clubs. And I almost forgot that I'd put in WhatsApp. I'm like, why are people calling me for your WhatsApp? Is this a second cousin from Europe or something? And I answered, and I had 3 people talk to me in a row that were far further along in their journeys, had more experience, had exited businesses, had gone from, operators to just literally founders, and had exited CEOs. And they all said a very similar story, that it was like, I don't even need to hear your story to why you're having these challenges. I know that it's because you're not keeping your people accountable, which was true. And hearing it brought it to the surface, and that's what sparked me to make that change. And that has really changed my journey of business. That one thing alone has made it all worth it. And then the other 2 things is just having the sounding board. It's, I go out with mates. They're all in different positions. Not many of them have businesses, so you can't really lean on them for that. You speak to your spouse, but they might be in a different position again. You can't go to your staff because that's not the type of relationship it is. So just having other people in the room that are on similar journeys, get it, know the struggles, and just hearing about someone who's already had that problem and they're a bit further along the road, and just being able to avoid some of the steps because of such common ground and shares. And then the networking side is great as well, meeting people that you'd never meet if it wasn't for EO. Creating that commonality has been, just amazing for my development.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's so beautiful, because I too experienced that when I first joined. Just the how accommodating people are. If you have a question, and they're so warm, and it just feels like family. Yeah.
It does. And even my wife, when we went to the gala, said, what's amazing? Just how warm and accommodating and and like kind people ask it. I know it's really sort of like pulls you in, doesn't it? There's a certain energy. You don't get that quite often. And my head of my health division, who's sort of the 2 I see now of the business, is one of those people we elevated that really grew when we changed the culture. The first thing he mentioned when I took him to an EO event was he's like, it was so addictive seeing how thirsty everyone was for knowledge, lack of ego, how warm, open, everyone had time for you, even if they had businesses that were 7 times the size. He goes, it's rare. I haven't been to an event like that. I'm like, yeah, well, you can see why I want to keep taking you. So it's great for him to experience as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. Now, if you were to look back at the young you starting out, what was your vision of the world, or what was your meaning about success compared to you now? What have you learnt about your new version of success?
Yeah, great question. So I've always been a vision type of guy. I've always spoken in sort of 7 to 10 year formats. I've, discovered recently with some of that neuro-linguistic programming work I've done that I'm actually very good at talking about the why and the destination, but miss a lot of the how and the gap. So sometimes people can't come along for the journey because I've got it all in my head and they're like, yeah, but how are you going to do it? And interestingly, when I was a teenager, it's kind of embarrassing saying this then, but I used to say, when I'm 25, I'm going to have traveled the world, have a 6-pack, and be making good money. But I never told people how, and this was a kid living in the burbs, so people used to laugh it off going, how are you going to do it? But I just knew if I kept moving in the path, I would get there. Now, I'd say the biggest change, the vision is still there. However, the reason to do it is very different. It used to be external factors, like I said, have the abs, have the this, but I learned from a young age chasing that I gained those things and it didn't really change much internally. I used to think when I'd have that, all my problems would go away, but it didn't quite happen. So now I do it from a space of impact. I move towards it because I'm passionate and I love it, not necessarily from a fear of perhaps not being enough or having to prove it to someone or to try and get out of a bad situation. So that's been a big shift as I've moved through the reason to why. And there was fears as that shift was starting to occur that maybe I won't be quite as driven if it's coming from a place like that rather than chasing external. But I've found that the drive doesn't stop and you actually move through it from a far healthier place and you're able to enjoy it more rather than making it sort of suffering.
Oh, I love that. That's exactly what I cover in my book called 360 Degree Success. Because, as an entrepreneur, we kind of go through the same thing. Hustle for all the success externally, only to realize it doesn't fill you up, and then you find it internally. But for you, did you do some sort of professional self-help? What got you through to understanding yourself better?
Yeah, so look, bit of a vulnerable share, but I had a big instance in my life when I was 25, 26, where all of that stuff that I sort of shared, and there's a lot of depths in sort of how I grew up and quite a bit of trauma, but I won't get into that. But it came to fruition when I was 25, 26. It was almost like a quarter life crisis. And I was realizing that something wasn't right. Now, on reflection, I'm actually really glad that happened because it forced me to really learn what's what and look within perhaps at a younger age than some. So I did do a lot of professional work at first because of necessity, not because of want, because of how poor I was doing. But I went through a couple of psychologists and I wasn't ready to be helped until that point. And then when it happened, I'm just out of chance to a friend's partner who was going through something similar and recommended someone to me, found a very, very good psych that worked with me. And I did like weekly work for 2-3 years. And I think she was probably putting her head through the wall the first 6 months because of how far along I wasn't. And I had no self-awareness at all. But, it forced me to have look within from a young age. And then I just realized from my journey, every time I did that inner work and sort of moved through something, internalized it more, did it for the right reason, played within more the heart rather than compartmentalizing it, my life improved. And that wasn't just, external improves, like better business or more money, but relationships, connections with friends, with partner. So, I don't know if obsession's the right word, but I kind of became a little bit obsessed about that. And I found even being a leader, I'm not sure I've been able to lead a team of 38 if I still presented and had the awareness I did before that event. So on reflection, it was kind of a cheat code, and I'm really glad it happened.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so proud of you. You did all the work, and yeah, when people want the result, but they sometimes don't want to do the hard work, and that hard work is very mental. So thank you for sharing that. So if you had to look, summarize if everything that you've been, trying to overcome, and now that you can see what life is all about, what does it mean for you in terms of, what do you want people to remember you for? Or what is your legacy? What is the outcome that you want out of your life?
Yeah, I think the word is impact. If I had to choose a word, so I do a bit of philanthropy work as well. We do some work over in Kenya with a foundation called One Heart that I also met someone through the business. And I reflected, especially the last few weeks, on my life, and I've always been a coach at some capacity. So I used to view it as, a little bit more simplistic, that I'm just coaching my clients, but I was very good at motivating them and making them better, even with their own lifestyle choices. So it was deeper than that, which is part of the reason why I ran my business so simply back then. I never did any back-end work, but I never lost clients, and I gained clients very easily because people wanted to be around that. And then when I started to change my business from not actually servicing the clients anymore and delegating that, started to realize I was still a coach, but I'm coaching my staff members on how to do that now. And if I even think about some of the passion projects I've done, it's all around coaching and people and helping people find perhaps those things within themselves that I shared that I had to find when I was 26, 27, which can be really hard because I didn't have that support system once again, and I had to do it on my own. And, if I just share a line that, like, I want to be that person for some of these people that I wish I had at that stage. Someone that
Beautiful.
right direction, challenge where you are. So for me, that's going to be the legacy. It's the impact and being that person for others, because, I view it a bit as a gift. And I'm not saying that the journey has been reached. There's so much work I've got to do, and I still have so many triggers and things that present as so many blind spots, right? But if there's anything, it's that for sure.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think we have a lot in common. I too just feel like I just want to give back. After you've done it for yourself, you want to give back by passing on the wisdom. Well, thank you so much for the conversation. I learned so much, and I also felt so connected. You're so vulnerable, and we have a lot in common, like I said. How do people connect with you? Where are you?
On LinkedIn. Yeah. So LinkedIn, I've been posting a little bit on LinkedIn lately. That's a new thing the last couple of months. So Marco Monteiro, share the name, please connect with me. And we also have a website, mjhealthgroup.com. There's, my collection of businesses on there, and there is a little message that you can drop me a line if you like. So either those two modalities.
Awesome. And if you're an entrepreneur and you're in Melbourne, join Melbourne chapter so you can hang out with Marco. But thank you so much, Marco, for your time today.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.